You're listening to What in the World with Richard Garner on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada. Not breaking news. And depending on who you are, and perhaps your political sway, you have an opinion about not only this particular Prime Minister, but how he's governed. But it's hard to argue that any Prime Minister in recent history has ever been more polarizing than the current one. But is he, as tonight's guest calls him, a clear and present danger to democracy? Big claim, but he backs it up. The author of The Party of One, Michael Harris, tonight on What in the World, Sirius XM Canada Talks, channel 167.
Beauty, I wish that I believed enough to believe. And the operator replied,
everything to you. You say you want to start something new, and it's breaking my heart you're leaving.
Welcome back to What in the World with Richard Garner on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
The book is Party of One. The author is Michael Harris. The subject is Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Our guest tonight is an investigative journalist, and he has written many books and reported on pretty much every major issue in this country for a long period of time. But it's this particular book at this particular time that certainly garnered a lot of attention, not only here in Canada, but now south of the border, as this best-selling book makes its way across the parallel into another area where I think will come up tonight as far as who might have influenced this particular Prime Minister and his tactics. Michael, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
So let's start with the idea behind writing the book. It's not obviously a revelation that somebody like you that's done what you've done would write a book about a Prime Minister in this particular country, but Canada's radical makeover is a big assertion, but there's a lot of people out there that would agree that these are special and unique times as it pertains to the person leading this country, not their politics only or necessarily, but how they've chosen to govern. Is this what drove you to write this book?
Exactly. What drove me to write the book was that we have our first rogue Prime Minister in Canada. And I'm not a person who argues about the right of various political parties to come in and out of power with different policies. But this is a person who came into office carefully hiding his disregard for Canadian institutions and his disregard for the parliamentary system itself. And if you examine the record, he has been on record for a long time with those feelings. And in fact, the main impetus behind the book was Stephen Harper radically changing the country without ever fessing up to the country what he was about, always concealing what he was doing. And it comes down to, I think, the key characteristic of this Prime Minister. He is the first marketing Prime Minister. He sells us the aluminum siding. He tells us what he wants us to hear so that it'll fit the perceptions that he wants out there, but he has no commitment to the truth. And when I saw enough examples of that, I've spent most of my life covering justice issues. And in justice issues, the truth is really all that matters. Justice is truth in action. Politics should be the same. And when I saw this guy, time after time, concealing his motives, using communications to deceive people, I thought of what John F. Kennedy said about democracies. He said, in a democracy, it's always necessary to tell people the truth, because if they don't have the truth, it devalues and makes false the whole voting process because they're not making an informed decision. This is a guy who believes he doesn't really have to tell the truth to Canadians. And as soon as I realized that, I started taking a close look at how he has decided some major files and came to the conclusion. We have a person who is more of a U.S. Republican than a Canadian politician, and a man who really doesn't have much faith in our system.
So let's talk about that assertion, the more like a U.S. Republican.
Yeah.
Because if you're paying attention to, let's say the last 15 years of North American politics, and you really follow not just who's in power and what's going on, but literally how they have chosen to imprint their vision. And a lot of people would argue, even somewhat regardless of your political stripes, that there was a new era in the Bush-Cheney presidency in 2000. This was something that particular sort of neocon group had written a lot about in stuff like Project for the New American Century, which they really expected to see implemented in 92, and then this guy from Arkansas showed up and kind of ruined everything, and they kind of had to put that in the drawer for 8 years.
Yeah.
But it almost gave them more time to prepare and really study and research societal behavior to know what they could do in a world of distraction, of people paying attention to so many different things, stresses, splintered agendas, etc. And essentially, it was decided by that group that, look, this is a new world. We're the one and only superpower, and the new way to go forward is unilateralism. It's our way or the highway. Screw the UN. Screw international bodies.
Yeah.
The press we're going to deal with only at necessity levels. We're going to talk to who's going to essentially help us push our agenda forward, and we're not talking to anybody else, etc. And we kind of know how that 8 years went. And then back to the sort of historical context that you were referring to earlier when you were talking about the Reform Party, Stephen Harper, and the Alliance, Stephen Harper, which, funny that you mentioned marketing, because I have this conversation a lot. It's incredible to me, almost impressive, for lack of a better word, how successfully this particular group did rebrand themselves from an unelectable fringe party to, hey, it's old Uncle Steve in sweater vests and he's writing hockey books, and I like that guy. And somebody's like, well, don't you remember he was writing these super extreme white papers for the unelectable? You don't remember? No, well, I don't want to hear that. They, now they're the progressive conservative. And lo and behold, like you said, very surreptitiously, very sneakily in some people's opinions, you come in with a minority government. So, hey, shh, don't rock the boat. Hey, it's your old buddy Steve. Guys, we're here. Don't listen to what those crazy liberals are saying. And they go in, and until they get a majority, they essentially lay in the weeds. And then once the other two parties have essentially, paved the way for the juggernaut that is the current administration, the real sort of agenda comes out. And this is what you've highlighted in the book. And it's interesting to me how that's not talked about a lot in mainstream media. And I don't know what your opinion is on that, but how have we missed this transformation that was done, again, very surreptitiously?
Well, one of the things that I think is axiomatic about politics is that, Kissinger said power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. I would say that the press has laid down in front of Stephen Harper. He's been successful 3 times at the polls, and a lot of people prefer to guard their access to an administration rather than to stand up for the I.F. Stone version of journalism, which says, you hold public office holders to account, and especially devious ones like Stephen Harper. When you mentioned the Project for the New American Century, You know, I've done 150 interviews on this book. That was the best question I've gotten for this reason. Stephen Harper believes passionately that the truth doesn't matter. I've seen lots of examples of it. And what he does is actually take something out of the playbook of that neoconservative group in the United States who thought they were going to take over the world. The centerpiece of their philosophy was, guys like me and you belong to the reality-based universe. Those guys are the superhumans, and they create facts when they act, and then you and I have to deal with them. So when they do something, it becomes a fact. When I interviewed Stephen Harper's mentor from the Reform Party, Preston Manning, he made the comment to me that what you have to remember with Steve is words don't matter much to him. And if you think about that, and you think about someone like Barack Obama, who thought that belief in the leader was a very important thing, change that he represented, you could believe in it. It was true. What Preston Manning was saying is this guy will say anything that suits his purpose. He doesn't care if it's true. And the fact that he's the prime minister, if he says something is true, he actually thinks he's created the fact, just like the people in the New American Century were talking about, that we are the reality-based people, but they are the kind of master race people who create facts when they act. And so when Stephen Harper, for example, on the F-35 acquisition, the most expensive military acquisition in our history, lied to people, both in the House of Commons and outside, and there was no polite word for it. It was just garden variety lying about the cost of the airplane. It suddenly dawned on me he didn't see it as lying at all. He saw it as operating with his prerogative to create the facts. And I saw it in case after case after case. And just to go back historically to one thing you said, you ask why or how this could happen in media, especially falling down on the job, because what I do is ordinary. It's not extraordinary. It used to be the norm, but it's not the norm anymore. Now this kind of work is extraordinary. But back in the Vietnam days, I think the establishment learned one big lesson, and the lesson basically was, we got a war stopped by the media speaking directly to people. We can never allow that stuff to happen again. So the first priority is no more Woodward and Bernsteins, no more Daniel Ellsbergs. What we have to do is own the media, and then it will be a corporate messaging exercise, which I think it largely has become. And Stephen Harper is a past master at that. He just put out a new budget, as you know, and he's going to put $13.5 million into the marketing in the next 8 weeks to sell the message of the perception that this was, the best thing since Wayne Gretzky. And that's his approach to all public policy. No debate, no questioning, just 100% hard sell marketing.
And it's very much we're the adults. And this is, reminiscent of a lot of bad history where a certain elite group, and this is why we have to talk about collectivism. It's a word that, again, I don't think is used enough or at least defined enough. And of course we hear people say, often enough, well, the end justifies the means, but that the idea of that as a political foundational element has been, again, the catalyst for some of the ugliest things that have ever happened in humanity, going back as far as Hitler and that particular regime. And this and collectivism means, as you know, that the greater good, right? If I believe I'm on the side of the greater good, and this is part and parcel when you're talking about an evangelical Christian, which we're talking about here, we can get to that a bit later, then absolutely everything else, to your point, of lying, of deceiving, of whatever it is, none of it is considered, because I'm on the side of the greater good. So yes, whatever you have to do to ultimately get that particular agenda across, you do. And by it being associated with the greater good, it in and of itself becomes good. And that's about the scariest thing you can ever say about a political leader, because all bets are off, right? Everything that you do is never considered. Like, you don't have people sitting in a room going, guys, I'm not sure about this. This feels whatever. It starts with whatever's the top of the pyramid, which we've defined is what Canadian society should be. And we are here to shepherd that through no matter what it takes. And again, I don't see anybody calling this particular party out on that.
No, because as I said before, the reaction of most people in the media is you don't take on the established power. You will kill your access, and not only that, you will make your publisher unhappy. There's a whole range of corporate messaging going on, mostly in TV, but also in print. But, when it comes down to what Harper actually is, he is a Tea Party Prime Minister of Canada who has the great advantage that the Tea Party does not have in the U.S., that it's a multiple party system. So he has been able to live by exploiting the differences, embittering people as groups, knowing that if he has that rock-solid base of 30% in a first-past-the-post system, and he can pick up 8% of the swing vote in any election, he gets 100% of the power for 38% of the vote. And those are the percentages he works. Now, ironically, pollsters like Frank Graves of ECOS have said that, Harper's rebounding, he's connecting with Canadian values. It's that sort of hero worship of electoral success that often passes for analysis in Canada. But the reality is, all Stephen Harper has honed in on better than anyone, like you were talking about your Republican analysts about the new wave of, how politics are done today. He's taking advantage of the first-past-the-post system, knowing that on any given day, 66 to 70% of Canadians don't want him, but that they are divided on the progressive side of the issue. And as long as that division continues, we will have a Tea Party Republican PM who has a pretty good shot at every election of winning, if not a majority, then certainly a minority, which is, I think, what he is. If you're going to give him some credit for his political skills, he knows that the first-past-the-post system is his best friend. It's got nothing to do with connecting with the majority of people.
Yeah, well, and again, as we approach this election in October, it's going to be interesting to see what type of mobilization this has on both sides. We're going to continue with our guest tonight, Michael Harris, the author of Party of One. This is What in the World, Sirius XM, Canada Talks, Channel 167.
Don't you know we're talking about a river?
This is What in the World on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
And welcome back to the show. Our guest tonight, Michael Harris, the author of Party of One. We started down the road a little bit, Michael, of investigative journalism and where it's at as we sit here today. I think you very rightly referenced a real inflection point for the world that we're living in today, as it pertains to the idea of the consolidated media, the corporate-owned media, and that was definitely... People forget how the 60s... Well, I mean, people talk a lot about the 60s, but how close that was to a full-blown revolution, right? I mean, you really had revelatory things going on at the civil rights level, certainly at the social and human rights level, at the political level, and it really did, I think, surprise the powers that be that things could have gotten that far out of hand as quickly as they did. And like you said, lessons learned. So we sit here today in this era where we know that, the consolidation of media plus the corporatization of media has led to all sorts of job cuts and newsrooms being slashed. And therefore, what's the biggest victim of that? Well, the most expensive part of journalism, investigative journalism, because it takes so long to actually build a story, to do the research. And so we've shifted to, well, you got to have a story out today or tomorrow or whatever. So what does that then provide? It provides very little time for the reporters, so they become dependent on the access to the people, whether it be at the Pentagon or in this case in Parliament Hill or whatever. So you're ripe for manipulation, because
Absolutely.
you are essentially the only news you're going to be able to report is stuff you're getting from the minister of this or sources in the Defense Department or whatever it is. And of course they can play however they want. And if you make the crazy mistake of not playing ball with them, your access is cut off. And I don't know if you saw last night, Judith Miller, former New York Times reporter, who was really, the poster woman, perhaps a little unfairly because she wasn't the only one, but she certainly had the biggest spotlight, writing in the New York Times, and really helping the drumbeat for war with Iraq and the WMD stuff, which, subsequently we all know how that turned out. New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, a lot of people actually printed op-eds a couple years after saying, hey, we really dropped the ball.
What a hoax.
Yeah, of course. But Miller goes on, Jon Stewart last night, or whenever it was, still essentially unwilling to be accountable, but not realizing that when she's saying, well, I just got manipulated. These people were saying this and these people were saying that, not realizing she's shedding light on just a travesty, because if this is the case, if our journalists are that susceptible to this, and this is how the system is, we're in some big trouble. Talk a little bit about this particular area and how effective it's been used by this particular administration, because they don't seem worried, Michael. They don't seem to care about whether it's that 60% or whatever you said who don't like them. They realize that regardless of what the media might want to report, they don't have the resources to really do the digging.
Well, Stephen Harper puts it this way. He says the public doesn't care about details. So in a universe where the leader thinks the public doesn't care about details and has a massive budget, a massive communications spinning budget, then you can expect the absolute worst out of the worst in the media. And by that I simply mean what journalists have become is essentially stenographers for the system. So if the system gives the press conference, they will reflect back in their various news agencies what the system is saying. Almost nothing that this particular government is saying is fact-based. It's all agenda-driven, and you've got television surviving on water skiing across the surface of events. Hard to put an investigative piece on television these days, very expensive. Hard to find a publisher who would back a person like me up who's written 8 or 9 books involving complex social failures that took a lot of time and effort to pin down and to get the numbers of the players. That sort of stuff, all of the people who are doing that work now are in the social media and in the new media. They are not in the mainstream media. The mainstream is totally obsessed with its role as part of the establishment. And that means that you have incredible swaths of our public life that are not covered, and that they feast off of what the government's daily offerings are. And quite frankly, Lyndon Johnson used to refer to the White House press gallery as his geese, and he would tell his assistant, assemble the geese on the south lawn. And we got a lot of geese these days, and the only saving grace is that the new media gives a different sort of opportunity to people who really want to do that sort of work, and I can tell you there are not many left. There are a few great ones in the United States. But to be honest with you, if Woodward and Bernstein broke the story that they did with unsourced stories or anonymous sources the way they did at the time of Watergate, today they would probably be fired, and Nixon would have survived that particular thing. Same with Daniel Ellsberg. He'd be in jail. He wouldn't be seen as a kind of an iconic figure of U.S. Freedom of speech and basically being a great citizen. who dared to tell the truth. Now we have our truth tellers locked up in embassies. We have them in exile in other countries, or we have them in prisons.
And you talk in the book about an enemies list, and this isn't just a figure of speech. You believe literally there is an enemies list.
Oh, totally. I mean, I'll give you a small example. I did a piece which challenged the numbers of the government on the F-35 acquisition because the dimension of the lie was astonishing. It was $10 billion in the difference. And it wasn't just some different form of accounting, or it wasn't some misinterpretation of the data. There were two lists, one with the full costs and one that took the running costs and the maintenance costs out of the purchase of these 65 stealth aircraft that we were going to buy from Lockheed Martin. And I wrote that story and said the numbers were completely false. And the next day I got a phone call from a person where I had worked for 11 years saying your column is no longer required. Now, there's no saying that it was cause and effect. It's pretty interesting timing. But that happened. The same is true of people in Harper's vision of the world. Everything turns into enemies and supporters. Everything is politicized. So if you disagree with the government, as I have often done, using reasoned arguments with facts, you are depicted as a Harper hater. You're not somebody who has something to bring to the feast by way of telling the truth in a democracy or challenging a lie. You are an enemy who hates Harper. His constant rejoinder is, don't let the haters win. And, of course, that divides people. And a lot of the media have bought into that. This particular book, which reads like an indictment of fact, it is not an opinion piece. It's not setting out to express what I think. It's setting out to lay out, much like an indictment, what this guy has done. The reaction has been, you hate Harper. So the Prime Minister's spin has been bought by a lot of people. And the loser, of course, is the public. When I worked at the Globe and Mail, Dick Doyle, who was the legendary editor, kind of an amazing figure, he said to me, the one thing that a person in my position can never do is hold up a great metropolitan newspaper and get an image of himself. In other words, it had to represent various voices, different styles. It had to represent the complexity of the society we live in. Now, there's a terrible homogeneity to everything in this business, and the only place you don't find it, guys like John Pilger in the United States, people like me up here, in the new media, but not in the mainstream media.
I remember I was producing a show, a current events show for Vision TV in 2003, and it was called 360 Vision. It was an intersection of faith-based issues and current events, obviously some juicy stuff. And I remember having a conversation with the group about objectivity, not necessarily breaking news in the world of journalism. That's been a staple, at least theoretically, since the inception of the Fifth Estate, let's say. Now, what was argued to me at this point, and this is right around the time that the sort of the Fox News era is beginning, and that the fracturing of the media landscape is really breaking off into people essentially just really wanting to watch whoever agrees with them and read whoever agrees with them. And I was told at that time, though, Richard, first of all, don't be silly. At J School, literally somebody said J School, which I love to hear. It's so hilarious. But these days, objectivity's out. Like, that's passé because it's looked at as disingenuous because we're not robots. We can't be fully objective. So it's actually considered more honest and forthright for your opinion to seep through what you're writing so that the person at home knows where you lean. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking about that, like, and to me it was analogous to the idea of, you can't be Gandhi or Jesus or Mother Teresa or whatever you want to say. So don't even try. right? Like, don't even bother. And in this particular case, what was being said and what was being accepted now at this level was that nobody can really be objective, so we might as well just go the complete other way instead of, to your point, can you be 100% objective beyond your conditioning, your leanings, etc.? No, nobody can. But if you're making an effort and you believe, as you're taught or should be taught at early on in journalism, that it's the most important aspect of what you're doing, then you have a much better chance to do that. And it seems to me today that very idea is just considered it's just considered naive.
I think you've touched on so many important things. I wish we had 2 hours to talk, but we don't. So I'm going to cut to the objectivity issue. First of all, objectivity on television these days, it's like the television news shows, the evening news shows, the talk shows are like merry-go-rounds of sophistry. The idea of objectivity has come down to bringing on party hacks where you used to see journalists filling the seat who did not work for the political parties directly or advise them, but now you see people from various consulting firms on insiders, actually party people as the people who have the inside picture. You give them each 2 minutes to talk. You as the person who the host of the show never resolves anything, which is why people go crazy watching Power and Politics or any of the network shows, because it's like a constant whirling dervish of unresolved stuff. In the old business of journalism, the idea was we were in a privileged position. We were sitting on top of events. It was our job to resolve some facts for the audience, not give this sense that it was an ever-whirling, unstable, irresolvable situation where anyone's opinion was equal to the other guy's. It was just a question of whether he honestly felt it. I would just say to your listeners, for people who think that objectivity is giving equal time to everybody's bias, what would happen to us if we followed that approach into our justice system? The justice system should remind everybody that the search for the truth is at the heart of the system. If it ever becomes anything but that, we are totally lost. So people who say you can't find the objective truth, I say take a look in court. That's what they do every single day. They try to resolve facts. But what journalism, which used to do that, is now doing is keep this state of constant public tension, nervousness, fear, and instability going by never resolving a single thing.
I feel sometimes like the Mark Twain quote about the weather, we're because people are talking about this, but it just doesn't. It feels like it's just the conversation is happening on one of those moving sidewalks in the airport, and the cliff is at the end. Because as we continue to point these things out, it's not improving; it's getting worse. And I agree with you that there's some, arguably light at the end of the tunnel in the sort of alternative media world, online or whatever. But again, that ends up being dismissed and marginalized. But yes, there's reason to believe that could change. We're going to talk about that a little on the other side of the break. What is the solution really? Because I think talking about this in a vacuum is not only ineffective, it's actually dangerous. We do have to sort of zoom out and talk about this as the greater issue of where we're going as a society. More with Michael Harris, the author of Party of One. It is What in the World, Sirius XM Canada Talks, channel 167.
Bright and early for the daily races.
Here's Richard Garner with What in the World on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
And our guest tonight is Michael Harris, the author of Party of One. We'll get to where you can find Michael's work, iPolitics, and as well as other books after this break. One of the reviews I read, Michael, Harris argues that Harper is more than a master of controlling information. He is profoundly anti-democratic. Is that something you feel is fair?
I feel it's
accurate, let's say?
It's beyond dispute. looking at the record, and let me explain exactly what I mean by that. This is a guy who came into office on the basis of doing a better job of running a democratic country than the Liberals, who were mired in the ad sponsorship scandal of going through up until the last year they were in power in 2006. It was a disaster for the Liberal Party because it left them morally bankrupt. Everybody thought if you can corrupt the institutions by which we are governed, you are not fit to govern. And Harper's great promise in 2006 was greater accountability and transparency. And he went on to oversee the most secretive government we have ever seen that has the tightest hold on information, silences its own people, silences deputy ministers, doesn't speak to premiers. Brian Mulroney had 14 First Ministers meetings when he was Prime Minister of Canada. Harper has had none. Maybe half of one if you count a small meeting that was held on one subject in the economy, but no full First Ministers meetings. This guy doesn't explain to anybody. But the proof in the pudding about what sort of an anti-democratic person we have on our hands is that Harper has been actually doing the one thing you can't do in a democracy, and that is we have government spending without verification. That was expressed to me by Harper's own information commissioner, Robert Marlowe, in the book. And he said, look, the essential thing with Harper budgets has been the government spends, brings in its budgets, but does not give the planning and priorities reports with them, so no one knows where the money is going, which nicely curtails any effort by the opposition to ask critical questions, to be able to assess if there are to be cuts, whether it's wise to cut in these various areas, because they just don't know where the money is or where the cuts will come. But it's much deeper. Harper, in opposition, talked about the fact that omnibus legislation, putting through massive bills, calling it budget measures, but having all kinds of other bills stuffed into it. So you get a New York telephone book size budget. And what Marlowe's point was, the fundamental role of the MP is to scrutinize government spending, first and foremost. By putting the omnibus legislation out in ever larger doses with massive bills like C-38 and C-45, the job of the MP becomes virtually impossible, and he is reduced to a minor political obstacle in Parliament, but not a person who has a serious role in administering, for the good of the people, scrutinizing government spending. If you take a look what Harper has done to committees, he has moved them behind closed doors. He has completely limited the ability of committees to travel the country and hold hearings publicly. And public information in a democracy is what makes it live and breathe. And then I guess, finally, when it comes to the resources of government, Stephen Harper has muzzled his own bureaucrats. He has particularly muzzled government scientists on the subject of climate change and global warming. He's even gone so far as to send minders with Canadian government scientists who are attending a conference in Montreal on the melting polar ice cap. So the minder was there to see if the journalist gets to put his question. The minder would decide. I mean, that's North Korean stuff to me. And, this is a guy who came in and said he was going to do it better and be more transparent. His own information commissioner told me for the book that he has cut off the flow of information totally. Not only has he not improved what the Liberals were doing, improved on it, but he has cut off the information. And without the information, all that's left is the marketing. And that's what Canadians have been getting. We get marketed, but we're not informed.
You mentioned Marlowe, you mentioned Brian Mulroney, and this is an important fact, because I got to be honest with you, I was hesitant to even really do this interview. Funny, to your point earlier, some people warn me not to do it because they know what happens to, like you said, the people that go down this road. Because I like to be as politically as I can. I'm not a believer that one is better than the other. I believe the entire system has all sorts of issues. It's a much longer conversation. I believe most people are selected rather than elected. And again, we could spend, like you said, multiple hours talking about the real core of a corporatocracy that we're living in North America and around the world today. But this particular situation to me has such a level of urgency and has really created such a level of fear in me that I really can't believe what I'm seeing. I cannot believe it. It's not just a simple matter of, my political affiliation is this way and I don't like this particular person, because I could give you examples of the opposite. But what is maybe more important for people to understand when, let's say they say Michael Harris just doesn't like Stephen Harper, is that the amount of criticism that has come to Stephen Harper and the Prime Minister's office around bullying, around censoring of information, all these type of things you've mentioned, have come from Joe Clark, have come from Brian Mulroney, have come from myriad other conservatives. And it would seem to me that when you get this many people who are of that political leaning speaking out, because they also themselves, as much as they might not agree with liberal politics and policy, are more concerned about the state of democracy and the state of the country and have actually stepped forward. You spoke to a lot of these different people in the book. Talk a little bit about how much mobilization on the conservative side there has been in terms of criticizing Harper and the way he governs.
Well, I guess you mentioned the most critical one is Joe Clark, because Clark was the person who said back in 2003 it was naive to think that Stephen Harper did not have an agenda. He spoke to the highest-ranking Republican policy reviewers in the United States who helped select presidential candidates for the Republican Party. He trashed Canadian institutions to that group. He fawned over the U.S. system and said it was better. He said that if he became prime minister, he'd be stuck to make his cabinet out of the people that got elected, whereas in the States they could be drawn from private enterprise. He continued with this same line of thought when he was head of the National Citizens Coalition. And if you go back, Richard, and look at the to-do list of the National Citizens Coalition, that agenda has basically been worked out right down to the selling of the Canadian Wheat Board to Saudi Arabia recently, and all the things that group stood for. And the reason I mention the NCC is the NCC is also the group that was created to destroy Medicare. And this is a prime minister who's gone far down that road, very slyly, but he has done it. First, by giving out federal money to the provinces without any conditions. So the universality is gone. A province has the right to spend the money the way they want. And I think the next step is transferring the tax credits to the provinces, because after all, they're the ones who administer health care. And as soon as Ottawa does that, they've got the gum of Medicare off their shoe forever, which I think is in his game plan. The way he's treated natives raised the ire of two prime ministers, Brian Mulroney, who said it was the absolute wrong way to go, and, of course, Paul Martin, who gave us the Kelowna Accord and has said basically Harper has set the clock back 10 years on First Nations people in this country. Foreign policy, Jean Chrétien, former prime minister, who's just met with Vladimir Putin, much to the prime minister's disdain, the current prime minister's, has talked about his foreign policy being disastrous. It's basically neoconservatism writ large. It amounts to flexing your military muscles and making free trade deals. And I guess Joe Clark had the most ringing criticism when he said there's something adolescent about Canada's foreign policy with Stephen Harper at the helm. I want to just say one quick thing. You mentioned, people might say, I don't like Stephen Harper. People who know my work could probably have said that when I wrote the Mount Cashel book, that I didn't like Catholics. Well, it wasn't that. I just didn't like child abuse, and got to the bottom of the case and ended up, the kids got $13 million at the end of it, a very long fight. A lot of people thought, why did you go to bat for an Indian who was in jail for a murder that two people said they saw him commit? The answer was I didn't believe it, and as it turned out, he was innocent. We found the killer. That kid got $2 million for 11 years in prison for something he didn't do. It wasn't because I was anti the justice system. And the same is true of Harper. One politician told me a long time ago, he said, Michael, the big problem is you don't understand the new politics. The new politics comes down to this. If you write a brilliant and stinging rebuke of my policy based on the facts, I don't bother arguing with you on the facts. What I say to my followers is, forget what he said. Have you ever wondered why he said it? And as soon as you shift the ground to motivation, you've got Stephen Harper in spades. That's what he always does. Criticism means you hate me.
And that was learned.
The Vietnam War means you were anti-American. It's just nonsense.
And like you said, it was learned play by play from 2000 to 2008, south of the border. We got to take our last break. We'll come back with Michael Harris. It is What in the World, Sirius XM, Canada Talks, channel 167.
Sometimes I'm right and I can be wrong. My own beliefs.
You're listening to What in the World with Richard Garner on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Got about 5 minutes left. Before we get into sort of the last stuff, Michael, where's the best place for people to find your work? Not just where they can buy the book, but also you're writing a bunch of different articles for a few different places. Where's the best place to find your work?
I'm the national columnist for iPolitics, so they've got a great site. I write twice a week for those guys, but they have everything archived. So everything I've written since I went there is available to people, covering most of the last 4 years of Harper. So that's a good place to look. You know what? One of the things I always tell people is, if you want to read anything I've written, whether it's Justice Denied or The Judas Kiss or any of the other things I've done, use your libraries. You don't have to go out and spend $30, but go to those libraries and use those books. And I'm telling you, I can tell from the response I get every year and the numbers of people that borrow those books that it's by far the best way for people to connect. They can go buy the book if they want the book. They can get an electronic copy. This book has now been turned into, it's released in the U.S. and it's also an audiobook. So if you want something to listen to in your car and you don't want to read the book, there's all kinds of alternatives.
And for American listeners, of course, south of the border on Sirius XM, you can find that book in the U.S., as Michael was saying. About a couple of minutes left, Michael. Yeah. Just quickly, because you kind of touched on it. The interesting thing that I can't figure out, it seems that this particular prime minister, as you were pointing out, actually has a contempt, for lack of a better word, for not only this country, certainly the institutions, and certainly what I guess he believes has been an over-liberalized Canada for too long, that doesn't jive with a vision that he has for it. But usually in these cases, you find people are reminiscing for nostalgic years where they think, oh, things used to be this way. But that can't really be the case here in Harper's situation, because, again, Canada has been predominantly known internationally for being peacekeepers, for being a little more liberal and whatever. What do you believe then is the agenda? Like, what is driving this, and what is the end game in a minute and a half or less?
I think Harper's end game is to greatly weaken the Federation. He does that by weakening the federal power. The way he weakens the federal power is he brings federal revenues to an all-time low. It's the lowest point in our history. And, of course, some people would applaud and say, I love tax cuts, but at the same time they forget that when the federal government willingly sets out to cut its revenues, it also is setting out to downsize all of the things that people have come to associate with the country, some of which you mentioned, but let's just mention Medicare, for example. That's a big one. Stephen Harper has taken $36 billion out of that, according to the provinces, over the next 10 years, and I think you're going to see an explosion of private clinics and other things. That's pretty as close as we get to a sacred cow, for not talking about Wayne Gretzky, is talking about cutting back Medicare and allowing private Medicare to come in. I think Harper's vision is of a Canada which is decentralized, a Canada flirting with with greater U.S. cooperation. If you take a look at the border service, they want to allow U.S. Police authorities to come north, not to be subject to our laws, to make arrests, and the integration, I think, is pretty key. And I think he's much more interested in a corporate Canada he's turned it's like a national yard sale to see what he's done with our resources.
And no question around the potential. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking annexation one day. That'll have to be for another show, though, Michael, because we're up against it in terms of time.
Great to
we'll
talk
have
to
you back. Great having you on. Thanks. The book is Party of One. It is Michael Harris, iPolitics.ca. Thank you for listening. It is What in the World, Sirius XM, Canada Talks, Channel 167.
Never let it get me down. So when I get